In 323 BC, Alexander the Great would die. The Hellenistic world would soon collapse into chaos, as his former generals and officials would divide his empire, and subsequently descend into what would become the Wars of the Diadochi. In 297 BC, Ptolemy I of Egypt, in an attempt to regain influence on the Macedonian heartland, would agree to sponsor an expedition to help Pyrrhus regain the throne of Epirus, which he had previously held from 307 to 302. Providing him with an army, Pyrrhus would retake his kingdom. In 288 BC, Pyrrhus and Lysimachus would launch a joint invasion of Macedon, forcing Demetrius to abandon it, though Lysimachus would soon turn on him, forcing him to withdraw back to Epirus. In 281 BC, Lysimachus would be defeated in the Battle of Corupendum. As Seleucus moved to take control of his European possessions, he would be assassinated by Ptolemy Ceraunus, who would seize control of the European territories for himself. Pyrrhus would use this opportunity to form an alliance with the new Macedonian king, for now securing his eastern border. To the west, in Italy, a new power was rapidly expanding. As a result of the Samnite Wars, the Roman Republic now controlled the majority of central Italy. In the south, the peninsula was made up of various Italian tribes, as well as a large number of independent Greek city-states. One of the most powerful of these states was Tarentum, and by the beginning of the 3rd century BC, Rome's increasing power began to frighten the city's elite. Tarentum largely possessed mastery of the sea and control over the Greek colonies in Magna Graecia. Though after the surrender of the Samnites in 290 BC, the Romans founded many colonies in Apulia and Lucania. Furthermore, some of the city-states in Magna Graecia asked Rome for military support, as well as Roman garrisons. In Tarentum, 2 political parties were present. The Democrats, led by Philocharis and Inesus, were dominant. They were decisively against Roman influence, as they knew that if the Romans entered Tarentum, the Greeks would lose their independence. The second faction were the aristocrats, led by Agis. They had lost their power when Tarentum became a democracy, and did not oppose surrendering to Rome, as would increase their own influence in the city. However, the aristocrats did not want to openly surrender to Rome and become unpopular with the population. In 282 BC, Rome sent a fleet under Admiral Lucius Valerius, carrying troops to garrison Thurii. The 10 ships arrived in the Gulf of Tarentum during a holy day, which greatly angered the Tarentines, who considered it a hostile act, openly in conflict with the treaty they had previously made with Rome, which forbade Roman ships from entering the Gulf of Tarentum. The Tarentine navy now responded by attacking the Roman fleet, sinking 4 Roman ships and capturing a 5th. The army and fleet of Tarentum now moved to Thurii and exiled the aristocrats, helping reinstate their fellow Democrats. Once Rome received news of the attack on their ships, they sent envoys to demand the return of their prisoners and the surrender of the perpetrators. The envoys were presented to the people, who subsequently mocked them and rejected their proposal. When the envoys returned to Rome, there was great indignation. In the years of 283 and 282 BC, Rome had seen victories over an Etruscan-Gallic alliance. Rome had also seen revolts in the south by the Lucanians, Bruttians, and Samnites, all of which had been subjugated after the Third Samnite War, but still remained semi-independent. The Romans, so outraged by the Tarentines, would order Lucius Aemilius Barbula to suspend his operations against the rebellious Samnites and march south against Tarentum. By the summer of 281 BC, Barbula's contingent would begin marching south, plundering the region as they went. His first goal was to recapture Thurii, depriving the Tarentines of a key ally, and giving his own army a base of operations next to the Tarentine borderland. Once the Roman army arrived, the siege was quick. The city soon surrendered and allowed the Romans to reinstate the pro-Roman aristocrats. Barbula now aimed to take action directly against Tarentum and began marching his army east. Tarentum began mustering their own army, aiming to meet the Romans in the field. The Tarentine force was also bolstered by troops from both the Samnites and Lucanians. The two armies met just to the west of Tarentum itself. The battle was quick, as the Roman army would win a decisive victory, crushing the Greek forces. What was left of the Tarentine force would retreat back into the city. Barbula's force would begin to plunder the countryside around Tarentum, though without naval supremacy and lacking proper siege equipment, the army would be unable to completely siege the city. The political state of the city was once again divided. A large contingent led by Agis aimed to negotiate terms with the Romans, while the Democrats still opposed peace and wanted to seek an alliance with Pyrrhus. Eventually, the people agreed on an alliance with Pyrrhus and sent him a formidable offer. Tarentum promised him full military backing, a fleet to transport his army to Italy, and the Samnites, Lucanians, and Bruttians would join his cause, providing him with tens of thousands of soldiers. Pyrrhus was also to be named supreme commander of the allied force, and was told there was great possibility for building a kingdom both in southern Italy and Sicily. Pyrrhus would decide to help Tarentum, as he believed he could count on help from the various southern Italian tribes, all peoples with a long history of conflict with Rome. Though he would have to secure his position in Epirus before he left, Pyrrhus formed an alliance and borrowed soldiers and money from Ptolemy Ceraunus. His longtime friend and ally, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, the king of Ptolemaic Egypt, also promised to send him 9,000 soldiers to hold Epirus in his absence, with the condition they would only serve him for 2 years. In return, Pyrrhus named him protector of Epirus in his absence. Pyrrhus first sent a force of 3,000 Epirot soldiers under the command of Milan to secure and prepare the city for the arrival of his main army. Though in Tarentum, the people had realized their inability to defeat Rome without external support, and decided to negotiate a temporary truce with Barbula under the leadership of Agis. This had allowed Barbula to break the siege and marched north to deal with the rebelling Samnites. Though now with the arrival of the Epirot troops, the Tarentine spirit for war was reinvigorated, and they quickly broke off their peace talks with Rome. Once the Tarentine ships arrived, Pyrrhus set sail with his main army for Italy. Though soon after setting sail, the navy would run into a violent storm, causing several ships to be blown off course. Nevertheless, the Epirot army would land mostly intact in the port of Tarentum. Pyrrhus soon saw that the majority of Tarentum was incapable, and were inclined to let him do their fighting for them, while they remained at home in the enjoyment of their baths and social festivities. He closed up the gymnasia and the public walks, and enrolled the vast majority of them for military service. While Pyrrhus was securing his control of Tarentum, the Romans had replaced their consuls. Tiberius Coruncanius had taken control of the northern army in Etruria, and Publius Valerius Laevinus was in command of the southern army near Samnium. Pyrrhus soon received word that Laevinus was marching his army south, heading towards Heraclea. Pyrrhus would initially wait to engage the Romans until he had received reinforcements from the allied tribes, though it soon became apparent to him that the reinforcements were delayed. Pyrrhus would decide to fight the Romans on a plain surrounding the river Cyrus. Before the fight, he sent diplomats to the Roman consul, promising that he could arbitrate the conflict between the Romans and the population of southern Italy. He asserted that his allies recognized him as judge and demanded the same recognition from the Romans. Laevinus answered that the Romans neither chose Pyrrhus as the mediator nor feared him as a foe. They entered the plain on opposite sides of the Cyrus River, where they set up camp. When Pyrrhus learned that the Romans were encamped on the opposite side of the Cyrus River, he rode up to the bank to get a view of them. And when he had observed their discipline, the appointment of their watches, their order, and the general arrangement of their camp, he was amazed, and said to the friend nearest him, "The discipline of these barbarians is not barbarous, but the result will show us what it amounts to." He was now less confident of the battle, and determined that he should wait for his reinforcements. He positioned a guard of skirmishers and light infantry on the bank of the river to check the Romans if they attempted to cross. Though the Romans, once they heard of the reinforcements which were coming to Pyrrhus, decided that it was better to attempt to cross the river and defeat Pyrrhus while his force was still divided. The Roman force formed up in their standard triplex acies formation, with the hastati in the front line, the principals forming the second line, and the experienced triarii forming the third line. On the wings, the Romans deployed their cavalry. As the Romans advanced across the river, the light infantry from both sides began to skirmish. Though Pyrrhus' skirmishers were greatly outmatched, as they had only been expected to slow down the Roman advance and give the Epirates a warning. Once Pyrrhus received news the Romans were advancing, he quickly began forming his men into battle lines, working to form his formidable Macedonian phalanx, and forming his Thessalian and Greek cavalry on both wings, with a reserve of elephants placed at the rear. Though before his phalanx was fully prepared, he received news the Roman cavalry had managed to cross the river at several points, forcing his skirmishers to retreat back to his lines. Pyrrhus now hoped to delay the Roman army, and buy time for his forces to finish forming up. He would lead 3,000 horsemen in a counterattack, hoping to attack the Romans while they were still crossing the river and find them scattered and disordered. But when he came to the crossing point, he saw a multitude of shields gleaming on the riverbank, and the Roman cavalry advancing on him in good order. Realizing the Romans were well prepared for an attack, he instead aimed to target their weakest point, the Roman cavalry on the flanks, which, although good, were no match for the Greek cavalry, which was both more experienced and the best of its kind. Pyrrhus formed his men into a tight formation before leading them in this attack on the Roman flanks. Pyrrhus, as he fought with his men, was easily conspicuous for the beauty and splendor of his richly ornamented armor. At one point, Pyrrhus's horse was killed beneath him, and Pyrrhus, realizing he had to be more careful, would switch his cloak and armor with Heraclea, one of his companions. Pyrrhus would then call up his phalanx, and after taking up position behind the formation, would charge the Roman line. For a long time, the battle remained undecided. Both the Roman legions and the Macedonian phalanx stood in stalemate. Though on the right flank, Heraclea, who wore the king's armor, was slain. The Romans, believing they had killed Pyrrhus, took his helmet and began riding up and down the line, displaying it. The Romans at once gained the upper hand and began to push the Epirites back, as they now believed their king was dead. Pyrrhus, trying to reinvigorate his men, rode along the line without a helmet to show them he was still alive. After stabilizing his battle line, he realized this was a crucial point in the battle, and now deployed his elephants. He used the majority of them to support his infantry thrust in the center. The Romans had never seen such beasts, and were completely unprepared to deal with them. In the center, the elephants began to disorganize, put the Roman infantry in a frantic state. Pyrrhus also deployed some to the wings of his formation. Once the Roman cavalry saw the beasts, the horses immediately bolted, running away with their riders. Once the flanks broke, the disorganized Roman infantry now broke as well, retreating across the river. The Roman force is estimated to have lost around 7,000 casualties, while Pyrrhus's force's casualties are estimated at 3,000, though it is said that Pyrrhus lost many of his best troops and many of his most trusted friends and generals. Pyrrhus's victory, however costly, had been decisive. Many of the tribes and cities that had initially allied with Rome now joined his side, and Pyrrhus's next campaign would bring him to the doorstep of Rome itself.